So welcome to the inaugural Human Development and Leadership webinar. We're happy to have you with us. My name is Karen Maskell. I am the current Communications Chair, and in 2 days I will be Chair-elect of the Human Development and Leadership Division. We have also on the technical side of the webinar today, John Breckline is helping us, and he is the Membership Chair for the division. And so he's going to be handling the questions. So if you want to type some questions in, he'll be managing that portion and making sure that we get your questions answered. And if you raise your hand, that type of thing, he'll make sure that you get that taken care of. I'd like to introduce you today to our speaker. Izzy Gesell is an organizational alchemist. As a keynote speaker, workshop leader, professional facilitator, and presentation coach, his skill is in transforming something commonplace into something special. His humorously serious and seriously humorous programs help people thrive and prosper during these changing times as they become more confident, spontaneous, and effective. As author of Playing Along, group learning activities borrowed from improvisation theater, Izzy was one of the first to bring the concepts of improv theater into the business world. He has also contributed to the International Association of Facilitators Handbook and Humor Me, a compilation of America's most prominent humorists. Izzy? Izzy, are you there? No, Izzy, we can't hear you. I'm seeing him in the chat that he asked, can you hear? And it looks like we might be having some technical difficulties. I can hear, I cannot hear you. And he can hear me.
I'm going to unmute him, and I'm remuting, unmuting.
I'm unmuted.
Yay!
Oh, yay, we got Izzy.
Okay.
That was not funny, Izzy.
I thought, he's testing my skills here.
Right, well, I figured since this was a stress program, I would put some stress on us all to begin with and have sort of a laboratory. So the idea is, and again, we're going to try to figure out how to make these slides work because they're not actually, now they're going to work. Okay. We're going to try one more time, yes. The idea is that stress is a situation we all encounter. There's obviously good stress and difficult stress. And we're going to talk about some ways to manage difficult stress to make it less negatively impactful. It's almost incongruous to think about humor as the managing stress idea, but the definition of humor that we want to use is adding levity and lightheartedness to your life. And the objective of this particular webinar is to show you how stress impacts you in the 4 quadrants of well-being, which are mind, body, heart, and soul, and how our self-talk contributes to our stressful situations. Looking at some ways to manage negative self-talk to change it into positive, and how the concept of improv theater actually adds levity and lightheartedness to our lives. This is, you will be able to ask questions. We will hopefully make this as relevant and practical as possible. And by the time you leave, I'm hopeful that you'll have at least 1 or 2 things that you can use to not necessarily eliminate the stress in your life, because I think that's impossible. What I found for myself is that when I use these techniques, I'm not as stressed as long. So to begin with, I'd like to sort of put it into a context of of how stress works, and I'm reminded of a time when I was on a small plane that was encountering a lot of turbulence. This was several years ago when I was just starting my facilitating and speaking career, and I was afraid of flying, which I guess technically is not true. Flying was fine. Crashing is what I feared, right? People aren't actually afraid of flying. They're afraid of crashing. And this plane was going through this tremendous amount of turbulence, and every time the plane hit a bump, I'd go, ah! You know, I was really stressed out, and whenever the plane smoothed out, I'd relax because I was feeling stressed, and when the stressor was gone, I was feeling a lot better. One of the interesting things about stress is that people experience the same things and they don't feel the same stress. So I would imagine that there are people in your life who don't share particular stresses with you, and they try to talk you out of it with logic. So people used to say things to me like, don't be afraid, it's much more dangerous to drive than it is to fly, which technically is true, but it didn't help me. One day a well-meaning friend, I was telling her the story, and she was pretty mellow. She must have just come back from yoga or meditation or massage. She looked at me with a sad look in her eye. She came up to me and she said, Izzy, if you're flying, don't be afraid. She said, you know, life is, if you get on a plane and it's your time to go, just consider that your time to go. You don't have to worry about it. And I looked at her and I said, what if it's the pilot's time? You know, it's like, my stress is my stress. Leave me alone. So sure enough, the plane's going through the turbulence, and I'm feeling very upset whenever the bumps hit. And I happened to look across the aisle, and there sitting next to his mother was a boy who could not have been more than 5. And don't you know that every time the plane hit a bump and I went, ah, scared tight, this boy would go, wee, wee. He was having a great time. And that's when I had one of these moments where I understood very, very clearly something about life. I realized that the boy and myself were being given exactly the same information. The data coming into us was exactly the same, yet our responses were completely different. And that's what was so interesting to me, because I'd spent so much of my life in terms of managing stress trying to control the outside world. If only this person would do this. When this smooths out, I'll be okay. What I realized was that it's the inner world that causes a lot of our stress, our self-talk, because the boy and myself were being given exactly the same information, yet our responses were completely different because the things we believed, the things we said to ourselves were completely different. I was saying this is dangerous, and he was saying this is fun. So I think the first thing to know about managing stress is that the key to managing stress is to recognize that a lot of stress comes from the things we say to ourselves. Self-talk, which is defined as that ongoing dialogue we have with ourselves that determines our beliefs about the world. And stress is very much about our beliefs about what may happen, what's happening, or what is happening. So the first step is to recognize self-talk. And let's take a look at self-talk. And I'm going to look at 10 forms of stressful self-talk. I'll define them in a short way, and what I'd like you to do is just pay attention to ones that you see yourself in. And in other words, we all have these forms. We all use them, but some of them are more relevant to us as more than others. So the first form of negative self-talk is called awfulizing, which is defined as turning a difficult or unsatisfactory situation into something awful, terrible, or intolerable. And I will say that if you would like to have these definitions, and we're going to have a way to change negative self-talk, a process later on, if you'd like to have a copy of this, just send me an email at izzy@izzyg.com, and I'll get the information to you. So the first form is awfulizing. The second is blaming, which is concluding that something or someone else is responsible for the difficulties we encounter. And there's a difference between blaming and responsibility. So a lot of our issues now is relieving stress by blaming someone else. A third form of negative self-talk is the control fallacy. This is defined as making yourself the reason for another person's behavior or feelings, such as, if I know where my child is all the time, nothing bad will happen. Or if I give this person a lot of presents, he will really like me. We believe we can control things that are really not in our control. And one of the key management techniques for managing stress is to learn to act on things you can control and let go of things you cannot. Another form of negative self-talk is negativizing, seeing only the negative in a situation. And again, if we don't see ourselves in these, we certainly know people who are like these, catastrophizing, expecting that the worst will almost certainly happen. Now, catastrophizing, the best example that I could give for myself and for others is to think about what goes through our mind when the phone rings in the middle of the night. 99% of the time we wake up screaming, going, oh, we think something's wrong, the phone rang. Yet in reality, the experience in our lives is that most of the time the phone rings because it's a wrong number. Yet nobody wakes up going, wrong number! We wake up screaming, frightened about something. That's catastrophizing, expecting the worst will almost certainly happen. Overgeneralizing is a form of negative self-talk, which is generalizing from a single event or piece of information to all or most such things. So if you find yourself using phrases like "you always do this" or "this never happens," or that's overgeneralizing. Polarized thinking everything is either black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, perfect or failure, the tendency to go to extremes, no middle ground exists in this kind of thinking. Magnifying is making more of an event than it actually is, making a mountain out of a molehill. Maximizing and minimizing is either over-focusing on things you dislike about yourself, while minimizing your positive attributes. We all know someone who, when we give them a compliment, right away they diminish it. Oh, I didn't really deserve that, or that wasn't so nice, or somebody gave this to me. That's minimizing, and it is a form of negative self-talk that leads to stress. And then finally, there's shoulding, which is I should have done this, I should do this, he should do that. The challenge with shoulding is that it's always in the past or the future. So what you want to do is stay in the present and act in the present. So we have these 10 forms of negative self-talk, each determined by what we say to ourselves. The importance of recognizing that the self-talk causes stress is that we have these 4 areas called the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual quadrants. And these are the 4 areas that affect our well-being. So when we talk about being in balance, what we're talking about is being able to have an equitable distribution, not necessarily equal, but whatever works for you, enough mental mental connection, physical activity, positive emotional, and lack of negative emotional stress, and then a feeling of spirit. So the self-talk, so if you notice in the plane, even though the boy and myself were being given exactly the same information, we were different in all 4 areas of this. Mentally, I was thinking it's scary. He was thinking it's fun. Physically, I'm tense and tight. He's loose and relaxed. Emotionally, I'm connected to fear, and he is wallowing in joy and happiness. And spiritually, I have no faith in anything, not even aerodynamics, and this boy is sort of at one with the universe. So I like this model because it really helps pinpoint how we can control our thinking, which controls our stress, which controls the way we feel, looking for that feeling of well-being. I'd mentioned earlier that the key is acting on things you can control and letting go of things you cannot. And the purpose of the humor, of the lightening up, of the managing self-talk is to get to a point where you can act on things you can't control and let go of things you can't. The reason it works is when you act on something you can control, it can be said that you master it. When you try to act on something you cannot control, I used to call this ceaseless striving, thinking of the myth of Sisyphus. And things you can't control are other people's behavior, the way the world works, traffic jams, and yet we try to control things very often. So I'm talking about this acting on things you can't control to a group of kindergarten teachers, and one of them raised their hand and said, you know, this ceaseless striving reminds me of the gerbil in my classroom. You know, the animal that spends a lot of time spinning its wheels and getting nowhere and putting out a lot of energy. So now I call this gerbalizing, and it really is helpful to me when I find myself stressed, that I'm asking myself, am I trying to control something I can't control? Am I being a gerbil about this? And when you don't act on something you can control, and let me see if I can get this next slide up there. When you don't act on something you can control, we call that giving up. You're giving up the right to act. It's your choice. And when you don't act on something you cannot control, that's letting go. And the idea is very much about learning to act on things you can control and let go of things you cannot. And that's where you get to that feeling of well-being. If you think about the stressors in your life, and most of the stressors in our lives are predictable. We know each morning pretty much where the stressors are going to be and how they're going to impact us. Most of those stressors are things that we can't control, and we wish we could, or we try to figure out how to control. So I would say the key to managing stress, however you do that, is learning to act on things you can't control and let go of things you cannot control. Now, if that's the case, then if we're talking about humor, how does humor work here? It turns out that humor is a fantastic way to manage these four quadrants of well-being. So, for example, mentally, humor works because it always allows you to see a different point of view. And one of the keys to managing stress is being able to see the situation from a different perspective. A different perspective gives us a different feeling. So that's why you're able, if people are able to look on the bright side or see another point of view, things don't seem as bad. Humor-wise, this is why kids say funny things to adults, because a child has one point of view about a situation. An adult has a different point of view of the situation, and being able to see the incongruity and the discrepancy between the two is what makes it funny. Example, I have a friend who has a 7-year-old daughter, and the girl was really frustrated one day. She says, "Mommy, why does Daddy bring so much work home at night? He never plays with me. He promised to play with me. He never plays with me. He brings too much work home." So the woman says what I guess most of us would do, explain the situation. Says, "Well, honey, your father doesn't have time to finish it during the day, so he has to bring it home." And the little girl thinks for a minute and says, "Why don't they put him into a slower group?" From her point of view, you don't finish your work, you put into a slower group. As an adult, we sort of chuckle because we think that's not such a bad idea. But the idea is that mentally, humor helps you become flexible. The more you exercise your sense of humor, the more you're able to see things. Now I get it. Now I see. The whole concept of laughing at something with someone else is about seeing their point of view. If you can make fun of something, you can see it from a different perspective, and therefore it doesn't have that stressful hold on you. Physically, humor works because it releases tension. Tension is the physical manifestation of stress. Tension and humor cannot exist in your body at the same time. In fact, one of the interesting things about humor is this phenomenon known as nervous laughter. Nervous laughter is just the body's way of getting rid of tension. And sometimes when you can't cry or you can't put out another way, your body will have to release its tension by nervous laughter. It's not about being disrespectful. It's about feeling very stressed. So laughter and tension cannot exist in your body at the same time. Picture two people moving a heavy piece of furniture. They're very tense. What if one starts to laugh? Right, you have to put it down. You cannot maintain tension and laugh at the same time. So humor strengthens that physical piece. What's also interesting, this is, I thought, a really neat thing, where there's a researcher named William Fry at the University of California at Santa Barbara, I believe, who studies the physiology of laughter. And he found that hearty laughter uses calories. This is great news. He found that 200 belly laughs is the equivalent of 10 minutes on the rowing machine in caloric output. This is great, because now when you think about going to the gym, all you have to do is sort of go, and you're done. You know, it's Miller time. You don't have to go. So we have this physical component. The emotional component is really interesting about stress because so much of our stress is related to our emotions. And humor works this way in terms of the heart, which is the emotional aspect of it. Sometimes it lets us feel closer to people and situations. In other words, the people you laugh with the most or the people you trust the most. Or other times, it lets us gain a distance from those people and those situations. And this is why you find humor in scary situations. People will laugh at things. If you can laugh at something, you can diffuse its power to hurt you. So this is where the operating room humor, the gallows humor, the humor about the dark side of life comes out, where if you don't laugh, you would go crazy. So things like MASH or the movie Life is Beautiful are examples of how humor is used to diffuse really scary, fearful situations. Unfortunately, this is also the source of the negative put-down humor of others, the racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic humor. When you laugh at somebody or something, essentially you're diminishing its power. You're diminishing its power to cause you stress, your cause of fear. Fear is an interesting aspect of stress. Most of the time when we're stressed, there's something we are afraid of. I'm not saying you shouldn't be afraid. I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do. It's just helpful to know what you're afraid of, because then you can act on it. The final quadrant, the soul's humor lightens us up. It lifts our spirits. It's the joke is, why do angels fly? Because they take themselves lightly. So we have this 4 quadrants of well-being, each strengthened by an active use of humor and lightening up. So the idea for so far is that self-talk drives our behavior because it drives our belief system. It affects our 4 quadrants of well-being, and that humor also helps us modulate these 4 quadrants of well-being. So then the question is, how can we use humor and improv to reduce stress? The connection of improv to humor, I found, is when I was studying improv myself and realizing it was a very stressful situation. I was afraid of looking foolish. I was afraid of trying to take risks. So I began to look at improv, and because when it works, it's a tremendous amount of fun. I would imagine if you've seen improv theater of some kind, you enjoy it if you watch it. You enjoy it because they're quick, they're fun, they're spontaneous, they make up things on the spot. And we think, oh, we can't do that because they're smarter, faster, more creative. It's not true. If you think about it, you improvise a good part of your day. In fact, most of us, unless we have a script written for us, improvise a lot. We improvise all the time. So looking at improv, why improv people are so successful and its relation to how we can use it to manage stress, improv people understand there are 3 basic qualities that they have, that they're trained to develop. These qualities are presence, acceptance, and trust. And I would say that these qualities are also very helpful for us to manage stress. So what I'd like to offer you is a look at how this works here. But I would pause and just see if there are any questions. This might be a good time before we, just to take a pause about halfway through. Are there any questions? Have any come in? If not, and there'll be another opportunity to ask questions later on. But no questions so far? Okay. The other thing I would ask you to think about is particular stressful situations that you have that you might like some insight into how to minimizing that stressful situation. Because if we can make it relevant, that's so much the better. So let's look at these 3 qualities of presence, acceptance, and trust that improvisers develop that allow them to exist in a situation that really seems stressful. You're there, you're on the spot, you're working with someone else, you don't know what the outcome is, you have to make things up, and you have to be funny. The thing about being funny, and the thing about humor in general, is that humor comes from situations, not necessarily from trying to be funny. So the point is, let me see if I can just, whoops. The idea is that your humor develops from the situation, and the more you practice your humor, the more it happens. Presence is about, oh, I'm sorry about that, something's going on. Presence is about being here now. The concept itself is very clear. The question is, how are we present? If you think about a stressor, now think about, now I'm not going to ask you to share it, but think about something that causes you stress. Generally, the hard part is that it's about something you can't control, and it's about either the future or the past very often. If you can develop the qualities of presence, then you're able to stay here. Improvisers learn to be present by learning how to focus. Focus is the key here, and I'll give you a technique in a moment that will teach you how to focus yourself. But it's very hard these days to focus because there's so much going on for us. There's just so much going on, and that's why multitasking is rampant. The challenge, though, is that multitasking, and studies are beginning to show this more and more, is not as effective as we may think it is. Focus is the key to getting things done. And what improvisers understand is that they focus on one thing at a time. It's hard for us to do that because we're so loaded up with things that we have to do. One of the challenges, one of the stressors in our lives these days is recognizing that the things that there's so many things we have to do that we think we don't have enough time. And the illusion is if we just had more time, then we'd be able to get things done. But, you know, it's the same 24 hours everybody has. One of the problems is that with technology, beside the stresses it causes, the techno-stress of the promise of perfection and doesn't often deliver, is that what's interesting is our bodies have begun to replicate nanosecond time. What used to be fast is not fast anymore. It's actually slow. But it's all relative. So think about how if you had to go back to your modem from 10 years ago or 5 years ago, if you had to go to a 56.6 modem, or if you had to do dial-up instead of DSL or cable connection. Do you find yourself sitting at your computer waiting for it to boot up, and you're going, come on already? And it's not more than 15 seconds, 30 seconds before it comes up, and that seems like such a long time because our self-talk is, this is slow. What you say to yourself happens. Your body believes it. Think of, you're driving down the highway. Let's take this example. You're going 65 miles an hour, and there's a car in front of you. Your exit's coming up. It says exit 1 mile where you have to get off, and there is this car in front of you. Chances are you're saying to yourself, I'm going to pass this guy because he's going so slow and I want to get off. So if you think about it, it takes less than 1 minute to go 1 mile at 65 miles an hour. But that seems to be so slow because our self-talk is, this is slow, and our bodies follow what we say. So what improvisers have to do and learn to stay in the present is focus, and they learn to focus by this idea of the point of concentration. The point of concentration is the smallest bit of information I need to focus on in order to move forward towards my goal. When we're filled up with so many tasks and so many things to do, we're running around, the point of concentration is, what do I need to do? Is my self-talk in the future? Am I saying, oh, if I don't get this done, this is going to be terrible or hazardous, and this, okay, what's my point of concentration? I have to do this. I was at a conference once. I was trying to get to an airport right after my talk, and I have about an hour and a half to get there, and I'm tight, and I run out, and I see that my car has a flat tire. And I start panicking. Oh, I'm going to lose the job. I'm not going to get to the airport. There's only one flight. I can get home. What's my point of concentration? Fix the flat, because nothing else matters then. And we've also found that the things we expect, the bad things we expect to happen, the catastrophes, the results, generally don't happen. So we spend a lot of time worrying about things that don't happen, or we assume consequences about things, then they turn out to be completely different. Mark Twain once said, "I've been afraid of many things in my life. Most never happen." If you think about it, that's true. So the point of concentration is always a way to get yourself back. What do I need to focus on now? Am I in the past? Am I in the future? If so, what do I need to focus on now? What's in my control? The second concept that improvisers understand is the difference between acceptance and agreement. They understand that acceptance is that they deal with reality as it is rather than as we'd like it to be. So they may not like the title of a game. They may not like the person that they've been chosen to play with. They may think that there's a totally different way to approach these things, but they accept the reality even if they disagree. One of the challenges for us in managing our stress is to accept things as they are. And one of the purposes of humor is to have that shift in point of view so you can accept things as they are and look at them differently. You know, I imagine if your parents were like my parents at some point in growing up, you were really frustrated or sad or angry, and they said, "You know, honey, this may seem bad now, but we'll be able to laugh about it later on." There's the kids right now. Improvisers learn acceptance through a concept called yes and. Yes and basically says, yes, I'll deal with this as I got it, and I will move it on. This is very different than what life is really like for most of us, which is yes, but. You were talking to somebody or you're having a conversation, and they yes butted you. When I talk to folks about how do you feel when you're yes butted, when people say but, the answers that come back to me are diminished, angry, frustrated, not heard, not accepted. I heard a story of a woman who was given her biannual supervision, and her boss loved her for 45 out of the 50 minutes and said, "But there's one thing I want to talk to you about before you go." And she said, "You know, Izzy, everything before the but was erased." So the idea is that yes and, yes, I accept this, and here's my opinion, is different than yes, you know, I accept it, but, you know, here's why you're wrong. You can disagree without being disagreeable using yes and. Yes, you don't like this report, and let me tell you why I did it. Is different than yes, you don't like it, but here's why I did it, because that's a zero-sum game. One person wins, one person loses. But you don't have to agree. Yes, you didn't like the report, and tell me why you didn't like it, or even yes, you didn't like the report, and I don't care what you think. It's still about a disagreement. The third quality is trust. We have presence, staying in the moment, acceptance, dealing with what is rather than what we'd like to be, and trust is about suspending judgment while allowing the process to unfold. This is a key concept to managing stress. Managing stress is very much about assuming an outcome or assuming somebody's behavior or intention. Being able to suspend judgment, trusting the process, is really key in minimizing stress, because the process, very often things don't turn out as we think they are. Understanding the process or allowing the process to unfold leads to trust in self. That's why improvisers can take this advantage of stepping into the unknown. And trust in self leads to self-confidence. And self-confidence is a key way to minimize stress. But so we have this idea about improvisers, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to sort of show you a little game. I'm going to play with Karen to show you how this presence, acceptance, and trust model can work. And also, what I'd like you to do while we're playing is you'll be playing along and see about these things about whether things turn out the way you think they're going to turn out. So, Karen, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. We're going to play a game called One Word at a Time, and for those of you on the call, this is a lot of fun. You can play it with kids. Actually, kids are better than adults because they're not so self-conscious. So we're going to play this game called One Word at a Time. Karen and I are going to tell you a story that's never been told before, and we're going to do this back and forth, one word at a time. The challenge is not to think ahead, not to try to direct the story because it's really impossible, and just to sort of create something together in a way that neither of us are knowing about. We'll allow each other to use the words period, question mark, exclamation point as a way of indicating the end of a sentence, but that's not going to be our turn if we use that. So let's come up with a title of a story that's never been told before. If somebody wants to type it in, they could do that, or else we'll come up with something. And do we have anything? I can't see from my computer. Karen, let's do the story. My summer adventure. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Right.
My summer adventure.
The summer adventure. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You go ahead.
Okay.
I'm still intimidated.
Well, that's your self-talk. So
I know.
Let's take a second just to use this as an example, because the self-talk, the intimidation is leading to the stress. What's intimidating for you? What's your self-talk? What are you saying to yourself?
I'm gonna go blank. That's my fear is always that I'm gonna go blank.
Yeah. And the idea is there's no time limit here. There's no right or wrong. But notice how the stress is about the possibility of the future, the catastrophizing. So the idea is, okay, let's do the point of concentration. What can you control in this situation? You can only control the words that come to you. So yes, it may not be perfect, but you don't know that yet. So the idea is I'll deal with it when it happens rather than suffering it through it now. Because remember, to your body, your mind is real. So like in a nightmare, when you wake up screaming because your body really feels that you had those experiences. So the negative self-talk, the intimidation, puts your body into that stressful situation. So the idea in this process is to say to yourself, okay, let me deal with it. And the more you practice this stuff, the more it'll go. So we're going to do the story of, what was it, our summer adventure?
Our summer adventure.
Okay. Once
upon
a
time
I
went
to
the
mountains, period.
It
Was
the
highest
mountain
that
I
ever,
climbed.
exclamation point. When
I
got
to
the
mountain
I
was
afraid
of
falling
off
the
mountain.
period, exclamation point. Let's pause right there because I think folks have the idea.
Okay.
What was your experience like there in terms of the game itself or your intimidation? Were you intimidated the whole time?
No, once I got into it, then I like you said, trusted the process. I just let the word come. Although there were a couple of times when I was thinking like 2 or 3 moves ahead.
Right. Well,
and then I go, well, like, there's no point in that because if he doesn't go where I want him to go, then it doesn't matter.
That's the beauty of it. Very often we are thinking ahead, and stress is about, oh, will this happen? How do I get to do this? What you did was a perfect example of the point of concentration. It's not that you never let your minds wander. The idea is the point of concentration brings you back to what you can control. And what it sounds like, and the folks who are playing along, obviously the story didn't turn out the way you might have thought.
No, we were going to the lake in my version. And you went to the mountains, so suddenly, where I was headed was, all right, I have to go somewhere else.
Well, once you let go and went along with it, you release the stress.
Yes, exactly.
And the idea about the intimidation also, the intimidation is negative self-talk. You're projecting into the future about things you can't control. Once you start trusting the process and saying, okay, worst that can happen is I don't come up with the right word, it's not a big deal, and you move on and you stay in the present, it tends to build. So thank you for being brave to do that. And the idea is, again, the presence is staying in the moment. Acceptance, you may not agree with it. Like you said, you didn't agree with the mountains. You were going to go to the lake. But you accepted the fact that that's where we're going. And then you trusted the process to lead it on. And that's what leads to self-confidence, because the more you do this, the more you find yourself going through situations in the moment, acting on things you can't control and letting go of things you cannot control. You build up that confidence to say, okay, I'm stressed now, I'm thinking this will happen, but I know it's the future and I'll put it aside. So that was a very powerful example, and I appreciate you being vulnerable enough to do that. Remember earlier I had mentioned that there's a benefit of that there's always fear attached to stress. And if you just noticed in the example that Karen gave, the fear was not being able to do it right, or blanking out, or looking foolish, or whatever it may be. The benefit of fear in managing stress is that there's always a fear associated with stress. So if you can say to yourself, whenever you're stressed, what am I afraid of? And then you can say, what can I do about it? In other words, what can I control? Your action makes you feel better. So stress brings this anxious feeling in our body. It's hard to deal with things when we're anxious. It's like trying to sculpt fog. You know, you can't really see it. You can feel it, but you try to get a hold of it and it doesn't work. So what you want to do is go to fear, asking yourself that question. I'm stressed. I'm anxious. What am I afraid of? Try to pinpoint that. I'm not saying that you'll be able to solve everything. I'm not saying that everything will be fine just because you identify the fear. The fear may be that you're going to lose your house. The fear may be that you're going to lose the relationship. The fear may be that you're going not to measure up to something that you think of. But knowing the fear is objective. Anxiety is not. Fear allows you to take action. What am I afraid of? What can I do about the situation? That leads to a feeling of success. Because when we take action, remember, stress very often, if you think about when you're stressed, we feel that we're not able to act. We're stuck somehow. And our self-talk tries to spin it out and say, well, if I could do this, if I could do that, if I could this, that. The more action you take on things you can control, which you get to by the point of concentration, the more success you will have. So it's not about eliminating fear, it's about facing the fear. So at the beginning we talked about the 10 forms of negative self-talk. Here's a way to turn it around. This sort of summarizes the kinds of things we were talking about here. The first step is to monitor your self-talk. The key here is to begin to recognize the things you say. It's always going on. Self-talk is always going on. Sometimes it's evident. I'm going to join the webinar. I'm not going to join the webinar. I'm going to go to the lake. I'm going to have pork chops for dinner. I don't like this person, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's more subtle. Have you ever been walking down, here's an example, you've been walking down the street and someone's coming towards you. You don't recognize that person, but that person is waving towards you. So generally our self-talk almost unconsciously says wave back. We may know that person. We want to be polite. Then we notice that the person is waving to the person behind us. It's not waving to us. And what does our self-talk generally say now? Right away it says, comb your hair, quick, our hair comes down. So the idea is begin to monitor your self-talk. Whenever you feel stressed, ask yourself, what's my self-talk here? See if you're using one of those 10 forms. See if you're in the present, the past, or the future. You want to be in the present. You pause with a deep breath. Ask yourself, what's my self-talk now, word for word? And then here's an interesting question that's been helpful to me. How am I upsetting myself? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to look foolish. I'm judging someone else. I don't feel that I'm getting the recognition I need. That person's a jerk, etc. How can I reinterpret so I can respond with reasonable and objective feelings and actions? Well, if your self-talk points to you in the future, you can reinterpret saying, well, I don't know that's going to actually happen. I may be catastrophizing. I may be awfulizing. I may be generalizing about the supervision, and I won't know what they really think about me until they tell me, and then I will deal with that then. State this reinterpreted positive self-talk to yourself. I'm going to wait until I see what happens before I respond. My friends, this is a process. The more you do it, the better it is, the more accessible it is for you. Because I found over and over again that this is not a change overnight, and it's not about eliminating stress. I get stressed a lot, but what I've found is that these techniques really help me turn it around to the point of I'm not as stressed as long. So the turnaround is really helpful because not only does it give us a way to change our self-talk and then act on things we can't control, but it also puts us in the present. And the present is really the only place we can live. What I'd like you to do for a minute or two is take a trip back over the last 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, and think about one or two things you heard, felt, or thought that made a difference for you. It could be what skill, tactic, or attitude will you implement, and then we're going to take some questions. So take about half a minute to do that, and then if you would have some questions, I'd love to see them. And Karen, you'll let me know if there are any questions.
Yeah, either John or I will. He's he's monitoring the questions.
Okay. And then what I'd like to maybe open it up as we get towards the end here, and see if what was relevant for some folks. So, are there any questions? If any come in.
John, are you there?
Wow.
I wonder what that was.
I'm from New York City. It sounds like a subway car.
I'm sorry, I
While
tried
we're waiting
unmuting
for
it, and here I am talking to the mute button.
Well, the scary part would be if the mute button answers you.
Did you have any questions? Were there any questions typed in, John?
No.
Okay.
Nothing yet.
I guess people are pretty content. What I would ask is, I'll give you another example of how humor helps you change your point of view. But I would ask some of the folks on there, if you could just type in for John or Karen, and they'll relay it to me and the rest of us. What was important, or what was the takeaway for you? What was the one or two things that made you go, oh, that's interesting. I might be able to use that. And while you type that, I'll give you another example of how humor helps you shift point of view. It's a great joke about a lawyer, a woman who went to Harvard Law School. She was from the Midwest. She went to Harvard Law School and worked in Boston for several years, then came out back home to Minneapolis area, St. Paul area, and she opened her own law office, and she rented a suite of offices, and she hired a florist to decorate, a caterer to bring some food, and then decided to have an open house and invite everyone she knew, because this was a very important step in her career. Remember, she'd grown up in this Minneapolis, St. Paul area. The day of the opening comes, and she's very excited, gets there very early, looking around, and looks up at the banner stretched across the entranceway, placed there by the florist, and she's horrified because the banner reads, "Rest in peace." She's furious. She gets on the phone and starts yelling and screaming at the guy, and how could you do this to me? I hate you. I'm going to sue you. You ruined the biggest day of my life. The man listens, and really, we've all been in that situation where we just have to admit what happened and move on. So he says, "Ma'am, I realize I made a mistake, but look at it this way. Somewhere in the Twin Cities area, there must be a body lying in a funeral parlor under a banner that says, 'Good luck in your new location.'" The idea being, so this is an example of what we talked about earlier, about how shifting the point of view changes the perspective and changes the emotions. This story started from the point of view of the lawyer and ended from the point of view of the florist. They both have a different perspective, and it's that shift in perspective that brings the laugh, that diffuses the tension, that lets us see things from a different point of view. So, any comments, John or Karen, from anyone?
Yeah, I've got a couple comments here from a variety of people. The first one is from Karen, who said she liked the control matrix. I'll try to act in the mastery and let go in the areas of can't control. Want to make a comment on hers?
Well, that's key. That's the key, yeah.
Okay. The second one was from Susan. She says that she wants to work on stay in the present.
Yeah, that's the hard part. The point of concentration has been very helpful to me because I have a scattered mind, a wandering mind. And the point of concentration is really helpful to me. What can I do in this moment right now? What's in my control? Over and over again. It's not a lesson I'm finished learning. It has been helpful.
And Jenny is saying, my takeaway is how to recognize self-talk and how it can truly influence our behaviors.
Yeah, that's a very insightful question. It's a practice. You begin to mind, because it's so constant and unconscious, we're not often aware of it. Once you begin to pay attention to it, you begin to exercise some direction with it.
It was very helpful for me when I, we were doing our exercise and you said, oh, that's self-talk, because I hadn't really classified it as such, and then you really were very kind and generous in helping to break that down, and hopefully everybody else found that beneficial for them too, because it caught me a little bit off guard, but it was a great learning opportunity.
And thank you for bringing that up. A couple of things that, one of the things it shows is that, being able to be vulnerable, admitting what was going on, is the first step in recognizing that. And what you point out about not recognizing it as self-talk, we tend to believe that there is a reality, an objective reality of our self-talk, and it's not true. The intimidation is a feeling of a result of self-talk that is a belief, but not necessarily an objective fact. There are very few objective facts. If you think of the airplane, the boy and myself were being given exactly the same data, but we have completely different responses. So that's a very good insight that you had there.
And Izzy, this is John. Izzy, my kind of look at this thing is that it creates a level of awareness that you've got to start with before you can even recognize that the self-talk or the self-doubt or any of that's going on.
Exactly.
You got to tune into yourself.
And that's very true. And if you think about it, tuning into yourself is an action that puts you in the present. It's about being present, because then you have choices. So even if you're talking to somebody and your mind is drifting, and you recognize, oh, I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner, but I'm having this conversation. My point of concentration is back here. I'm going to listen to the person I'm talking with. So it's a great way to start to bring yourself back to the present. Any others? Well, if not, let me again offer some of the handouts. If you want to send me an email, izzy@izzyg.com, and it'll be up on the screen a little bit after the story. I'll send you the 10 styles of negative self-talk with their definitions and the turnaround, and some other information on humor and stress if you'd like. And this is true for people who hear it at any time. So in closing, I'd just like to sort of put this in again a human perspective. I was on as many of my lessons, this was in an airport. I'm in Dallas, and I'm rushing to catch the last possible flight home, and I stumble onto the plane, and I'm tired and I'm cranky, and I don't know about you, but when I'm cranky, I hate everybody. And I know I was cranky because I was counting carry-on bags of the people who were coming onto the plane. And I didn't want them to have more than 2, because that's just not right. I'm trying to create order in my world, like being on the express line at the supermarket and counting the items to see if people have 15 or less, if they're following the rules. Although, who are you going to call? It's a tough question. Make a citizen's arrest, a TSA arrest. I'm on the plane, and the pilot, says we're getting ready for takeoff, and the flight attendant comes down the aisle checking for seatbelt compliance. And I didn't know this at the time, but I know this in hindsight. As this woman came down the aisle, she was bringing light towards the darkness that was surrounding my seat. I in hindsight, recognized that she was lightening things up. Remember, the stress is heavy. When we lighten things up, it just makes it easier to deal with. And she comes and bends over and looks at my seatbelt to make sure. And I noticed her name tag, and in the place where I expected to see words like Susan or Samantha or Sarita, I saw these words: "Oh, miss." Because this woman, and I realized this woman understood when people wanted her attention, they didn't raise their hand and go, "Oh, Susan, Samantha, Sarita." No. When people want this flight attendant's attention, they raise their hand and go, what? "Oh, miss." And rather than argue and rather than stress out with 1,000 people during the day, she had the presence of mind to accept the reality and trusted the process that it would be okay. And what was doubly interesting, so she let go of things she can't control. She acted on things she could control. What was doubly interesting for me, and especially for us, because all of us work with a lot of people. We come in contact with a lot of folks in our lives. This woman didn't say a word as she was walking down the aisle, yet she put a smile on the face of just about everyone she passed, including myself, because we recognize the situation, the reality of the situation. And what I think is important is as you begin to implement this idea of lightening up, of presence, being in the moment, acceptance, dealing with reality, and trusting the process, building to self-confidence, as you walk through the world, you will impact people. You'll impact people either way. You know that when we cross paths with someone who's very stressed or depressed, it's an energy drainer. When we cross paths with someone who's light, who's loving, who's happy, or even if they don't say a word, that energy feeds us. So my suggestion is that this is not only for you, but it's primarily for you, but it's also for the other people in your life. So I appreciate you being there. Again, if there are any questions, we'll take it. If you want more information, let me know. And I thank you so much for giving up this time and this afternoon.
Izzy, thank you so much for sharing this with us. This was truly, I don't know, great seems too light of a word, too nebulous out there. I have to tell you, and I don't know if many other people are familiar with this author, but you remind me so much of truly my all-time favorite author is Leo Buscaglia.
Buscaglia, yeah.
And
you're the second person who's told me that in the last month.
Really?
Yeah.
You just listening to you and I've read, I think, all of his books, and I have a lot of his books on tape and speeches and stuff, and I just find them so inspirational, and I feel you kind of channeling his energy, and
thank you.
And truly, I'm very touched by this program, and so grateful that you chose to share this with us today. To the attendees, let you know that we will be following up with you with our satisfaction survey to get your input on this process, and so that we can continue to bring you these great webinars. And I would appreciate you taking a few minutes and giving us your feedback. We really do appreciate that. Particularly, we do want to introduce more webinars in the future, so we would really appreciate that. And again, thank you participants, and thank you, Izzy, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.